interviewed you earlier, there has been a lapse in intelligence gathering, the human intelligence gathering. In other words, running agents or spies within these terrorist cells.
Right, and as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee said, I think it's the most important problem we need to address now. The objective of a counterterrorist policy is to prevent Americans getting killed. It's not the retaliation, it's to prevent the attacks. And if you're going to prevent the attacks, you have to know ahead of time about them. And the only way to do that is to have a spy among the terrorists who's willing to talk to you. Our commission looked at this rather carefully and concluded that we've got some guidelines, some rules that were established in the CIA in the mid-90s that have the effect of deterring case agents from basically trying to engage terrorist spies. And I think this kind of attack shows again the importance of intelligence, the importance of taking a very aggressive look at human intelligence.
Well, explain to us why theoretically the CIA would put these kinds of rules in effect. Does it make any sense whatsoever not to try to penetrate these terrorist operations?
My own view is that these rules do not make any sense, that in fact if you're going to get good intelligence on terrorists, you're going to have to deal with some very unsavory people. The rules were put into effect because there were concerns at the agency at the time that it was associating the United States with people who might violate human rights or be criminals. Well, I sort of say, yeah, of course, that's what terrorists are. And if you're going to get intelligence about terrorists, you're going to have to deal with terrorists. That's a fact of life.
And if you're running these unsavory individuals in these terrorist cells, you're presumably paying them for their cooperation. And as a result, I take it what you're suggesting, the CIA doesn't want to be in the position of having to tell Congress that they're paying these unsavory terrorists?
Well, I think that's probably what led to these guidelines being imposed in 1995. I think that in the wake of this kind of an attack, we're going to have to take a close look at that, and my guess is that those guidelines will be changed. But what we have to do now is find out who did it, and then we have to prepare a retaliation that would, I hope, be the most vigorous military retaliation we can against the people who did it and any governments that were in any way contacted with this, including, if it's in Afghanistan, the Taliban. And I think that the day of sort of talking about terrorism is over now. We've seen the catastrophe that unfortunately many of us have been worried about. It's happened. Tens of thousands of people have been injured and maybe killed, and now's the time for real action.
If the retaliatory strike does take place, and everyone assumes eventually it will, won't that, as some critics will say, just simply lead to more terrorism, the cycle of violence, as the State Department, and you once worked there, likes to call it?
Well, I think you have to be careful not to talk yourself into a Hamlet syndrome when fighting terrorism. You can always make an argument against military retaliation because it's going to lead to something else. You can always say that diplomacy won't really work because other countries won't support you. You can say that economic sanctions don't work because other countries will violate them. And you can go down the whole list of options that are there and persuade yourself that none of them make any sense, and at the end you do nothing. And effectively, if you do nothing, then this is the kind of thing that happens. And I think the American public will, when they take a deep breath, want and indeed deserve a very strong reaction to this. And I think it will be interesting to see how many of our allies who are today giving statements of full support, how many of them are really going to be with us when the time comes for retaliation. Then's when we'll know who our real friends are.
All right, Ambassador Bremer, it was kind of you to join us. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Let's go back to New York, and CNN's Aaron Braun is standing by. Aaron?
Well, thank you. We are waiting for the president whose day began in Sarasota, Florida, where he was going to make a speech on education. He then went to Shreveport, Louisiana, and then to Nebraska, to where the Strategic Air Command is based, and finally back to Washington. There are, it seems to us, moments in a president's term: the Challenger for President Reagan, the Gulf War for President Bush, Oklahoma City for President Clinton, now this, where the country looks to a president for information and reassurance. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, I expect we'll hear both today.
Expect you will, Aaron, on a day that defies description. The president, we are told, wants to deliver a message of, quote, resolve and reassurance to the American people. Mr. Bush back at the White House now for a couple of hours. He has been briefed by the vice president and members of his national security team. the key members of the Bush cabinet here as well, trying to direct the federal government's response to this crisis. Mr. Bush will address the American people, as you mentioned, from the Oval Office here at the White House after a day that began in Florida, saw him go to a military installation in Louisiana, then a second military installation in Nebraska. All this as he tried to stay in touch with the national security team, and all this as the White House, the Secret Service, and the military decided whether or not it was safe to bring the president back to Washington. They very much wanted the political statement of the president returning to the White House to try to dispel any notion that this was a country under siege. Still, this is a key defining moment for this president, 8 months into office. We're just a few minutes away from hearing him on this day of tragedy in the United States address the American people from the Oval Office.
And indeed, that political message that the government is functioning, that despite all that's happened, was repeated again and again by officials in Washington. Late today, I remember hearing Karen Hughes. It was almost the first thing she said. She was reassuring the American people that their government is running despite it all. This is the government continuation plan in the textbooks in Washington, D.C. This is a very young administration, and this is a major test, John.
That's right, Aaron, and at times there is a conflict, if you will, between the security arrangements and the political calculations. The president being kept out of Washington, the key leaders in Congress being taken to a secure bunker outside of Washington, all that part of a protocol. Go ahead, Aaron.
John, I'm sorry. I just want to tell our viewers that what they're looking at is a fire that continues to burn, and I assume this is a continuation until I'm told otherwise, at the Pentagon in Washington. These pictures that you're looking at now. John, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Quite all right, Aaron. The picture's quite a devastating day, the scenes we are seeing today. What I was saying is there is at times a conflict between the security concerns and the political calculation. White House officials very much saying throughout the day they wanted to get the president back to Washington for the signal that sent. At the same time, there are a series of protocols they follow when they reach a full high terrorism alert, as the government reached today, not only for the president's security, but for everybody. The First Lady was out in public. She was taken to a safe location, just brought back to the White House this evening. President Bush now, though, meeting with his national security team in the Oval Office for what has to be an amazingly anguishing moment for him, but we are told he will deliver a statement offering reassurance and resolve to the American people, and promising once again, as he has twice already today, to dedicate all the resources of the United States government and to call on all our allies around the world to find out who is responsible for these attacks today, and the president will promise to bring them to justice. Aaron.
John, you know, this day it has been very long for all of us here, and we look back, you can still, I'm not sure you can see it on the TV, but we can still see the smoke coming off the Trade Center. 3 buildings have collapsed. These extraordinary pictures we've shown you of the planes as they literally hit that building is one of those images that none of us, and we suspect none of you, will ever forget.
And Aaron, you know, given the horror and the scale of the tragedy that we've witnessed, I'm going to pose this question to Jeff. You wonder if anyone can deliver a speech that is as big as what has happened.
That's exactly right, I think, Paula, that, you know, when President Reagan gave a speech after Challenger, that was an awful day. 6 people died. It was a terrible accident. Even Oklahoma City, horrible as that was the contained act of one madman. This attack on the United States, which is not an overstatement, in some way makes words almost, it's too much of a burden for almost any speech to bear. Yes, we want reassurance. Yes, we want resolve. Sure, we're going to get it. At the end of the day, you know, we still don't know how many people are dead because they can't even go into that rubble 2 miles from here.
And, you know, Mayor Giuliani, Jeff, late today, talked in terms of a week, maybe a week, before we really know how many people have perished in that building. It is a long time to wait. There were a lot of phone messages when I was downstairs earlier from people wanting to know the answer to that question. How many people have died today? And that is simply unknowable.
And you know what,
It is
Aaron,
unknowable.
that makes that so hard to answer is that city officials can't even get within that perimeter area. There is still debris falling from these collapsed buildings, and there are an untold number of people still trapped.
And we
in
know
this
that there are a couple of hundred firefighters who are missing. There are 78 New York police officers who are missing. And nobody down there, 30 or so blocks away from where we are, wants to see that number go up. So they will wait until the building is as safe as it might get. It will never be safe to go in there. There will always be risk, but the risk will mitigate a bit over time, and then they will slowly start to go into the building, start to search for who may still be there.
And
But
that's
that is
why,
days away.
and
We
that's
are not
why the
there yet.
but that's why the president's speech tonight has such a burden upon it. The stark reality of that makes what the president has to say tonight as difficult, probably as difficult a speech as any president, at least since Roosevelt's day of infamy
probably
speech.
since Roosevelt. This
What?
is one of those moments. The president now just a few moments away from addressing the nation from the Oval Office. He has not been back in Washington for very long, but now from the Oval Office, the president to talk about the extraordinarily horrible events of September 11th.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
President George W. Bush from the Oval Office tonight, almost, not quite, but almost 12 hours since the attack on the World Trade Center, the first plane hitting the Trade Center just a little bit past 8:45 this morning. The president said there is a quiet, unyielding anger in the country. We were attacked, the United States, he said, because the country is a beacon of freedom. And in talking about the efforts to find the people responsible, he said, we, the country, will not only go after those who did it, but those who harbor them. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, joins us. John.
Aaron, the president also calling this a mass murder, and we've been unable to get any estimates on those killed and injured. The president using the term thousands when discussing those killed today in the attack. That last point you were just making could prove critical. The president saying the United States government will make no distinction between the terrorists who carried out this attack and those who harbor them. Just before the president was speaking, I checked in with a couple of congressional sources who are telling CNN that in private briefings today, key members of Congress were told by senior administration officials that the administration is, quote, confident, based on the early evidence in this investigation, quote, confident that Osama bin Laden is responsible for this attack. Now, in those briefings, we're told the administration did not say that with a certainty, but did say it was confident, that it had hard evidence in hand, that the investigation was continuing. That could be a significant thing to follow up in the days ahead based on the remarks of the president from the Oval Office to the American people tonight. Aaron.
Mr. bin Laden has been an elusive character out there for a long time now. I guess he is on notice today. I think the president pretty clearly made that known, but he has not been easy to find, Mr. bin Laden, has he?
He has not been easy to find, and there has been a great deal of criticism, some from the Congress, some from members of this president's cabinet now during the prior administration, that the United States government was not doing enough on the second point, not only to try to go after Mr. bin Laden, but to take action against those governments that provided him sanction. That a key distinction the president making tonight, obviously, as we learn more about the investigation in the days ahead and the outreach from this government to allied governments around the world and perhaps to other governments suspected of giving aid and comfort to Mr. bin Laden in the next few days as we assess the grim death toll and those injured in the days ahead. That's something else to keep an eye on as well. Aaron.
John, thank you. John King, our senior White House correspondent. Paula?
And earlier on, Aaron, we were talking with Jeff Greenfield about the challenge of the president delivering a speech where the toll has been so enormous. Jeff, your reaction to the president's words tonight?
They are the words that he had to speak. But again, the question is, when the president says, it may have shaken the foundations of a building, but it did not shake our foundations in ourselves. That's what a president must tell us, and it's what we want to believe. But I venture to say in the country today, there are a lot of shaken people, not just in this city. And I think the key is not so much the words that were said tonight, but what happens in the days and weeks ahead. How different a country are we going to find? How much are our movements going to be restricted by the need for more security? The only other point I want to underscore John King's point, Richard Holbrooke on our air said, if the Taliban in Afghanistan is shielding bin Laden and he is the one responsible, they must feel the full force of our response. When the president said we will make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor him, I think that's very much the point he was making.
There was a report in an Arab newspaper that is actually based in London, where the editor actually indicated that Osama bin Laden had telegraphed this attack as long as 3 weeks ago. If that is true, one could expect there to be some political fallout from this.
Peter Bergen, who interviewed bin Laden 3 or 4 years ago, and who was on our air earlier, made the point that every time bin Laden has been involved in an attack on American interests or personnel, he has in fact telegraphed, as he did presumably with the USS Cole and other events. And he said bin Laden, who once targeted American soldiers, has now changed his view. Any American civilian, by virtue of being a taxpayer, bin Laden thinks, is complicit in America, in what he regards as America's misdeeds. So You know, that's why the speech tonight is just the first of a very long chain of events whose end we can't possibly predict.
Meanwhile, as we all know, New Yorkers wake up to a completely different landscape here tomorrow. Public schools closed, the stock market closed, all flights in this country, domestic, international, postponed at least until noon tomorrow, maybe even longer than that. Let's check back in with Wolf Blitzer, who also has some more insights right now.
Paula, I'm sitting in the Washington Bureau, as is Cardinal Roger Mahony, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, who joins us now. Cardinal Mahony, explain to our viewers what has happened today.
Well, I think the very soul of our country has been severely tested. There has obviously been a great wound inflicted upon us. And there's great uncertainty in people's minds. There's great anguish. There's great outcry. But there's a numbness and an emptiness. And I think when the President called upon us to reach into the inner depths of our being and find that source of light, I think he has given us the insight we need. We in this country are people who, by and large, believe in God. We are people who believe in prayer. And I think this is the time, this is the moment when we need to rally our sense of belief, our unity as a people who believes in trust in God.
And as we speak, Cardinal Mahony, we're taking a look at some videotape of the devastation at the Pentagon, not very far from where we're sitting right now. When parents will try to explain this evil that occurred today, how should they explain that to their children?
Well, I think this is a precious moment for parents and families this evening, because I think children will be particularly terrified as they see all of these horrible things unfold on television. I think parents need to gather their children. I think they need to gather the family. And in whatever faith tradition they might have, they need to link today with their scripture, with the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, the Quran, whatever belief system they have. This is an excellent moment to do it. I think also something that's significant today, as I drove over to the CNN headquarters tonight, and the city is quite dark. It occurred to me that terrorists live in darkness, and their evil deeds, they do not wish those to be seen. So I'd say to parents tonight, gather your family, get out a candle. If you have a candle, light the candle as a family, and let the children in the family see the hope that is in that light. And I'm hopeful that the President is going to declare a day of prayer this week, hopefully for all of us to come together in our various faith communities. But just as the terrorists tried through darkness to bring down the spirit of our people, I'd love to see people light a candle in their home, maybe put one in the front window. Let that light of hope and trust in God's providence in our lives, let that shine across our country tonight and tomorrow.
Cardinal Roger Mahony, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, thank you so much for those words. And I just want to throw back to our Aaron Brown in New York, but to remind our viewers that first crash occurred almost exactly some 12 hours ago when that first plane crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. Aaron?
Well, thank you, and particularly thanks to the Cardinal. Those were extraordinary words, and much needed, I think, to remind us how we might deal with the issues here with our children. I think all of us at some point today have wondered how we are going to explain this to them. Larry Eagleburger has been a part of a number of administrations in the diplomatic positions. He's, I think, familiar to many of you as well. He joins us from Charlottesville, Virginia, I believe. Again, good evening to you, sir. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to go back a few hours to a conversation you had, because if I remember it correctly, you talked specifically about two things that came up in the President's statement. One is that we need to be proactive. The country needs to be proactive in attacking terrorist groups before they attack the United States. And this is the point the President made, that it is not enough to go after the terrorists. You also must go after those who harbor the terrorists. Heartened by the President's words tonight?
Very much so. I thought it was a superb speech. I'll tell you something. I think we're all going to find that the American people are much tougher than some of the commentary tonight that I've heard would imply. And if you have the leadership that I think the President demonstrated tonight, and if we carry out the words he said, and we do in fact act hard against not only the terrorists but those who have housed them, I think we will find that we have struck a real blow for beginning the end of this terrorist tragedy that's taken over the world for so long. We won't win it all at once, but if we now really start to take seriously the words that the President said, both in terms of attacking the terrorists and those who mother them, I think we can begin to see this thing turning around. And I think the American people will be totally in support of that.
Secretary Eagleburger, what is it that you've heard from commentators or anyone else that made that perked your ear there, that suggested the American people did not have the resolve or did not have the toughness to deal with this?
Well, I don't want to carry it too far, but what I've heard is, you know, they're all shaken. There's some implications that we're not going to sort this out too quickly. All I'm saying is, whether we've been shaken or not, if you watched what went on in New York City today, and particularly the police and the firemen, but also average New Yorkers, in the ways in which they responded to try to take care of each other, I was in fact very much impressed by their guts and their ability to deal with these things in a rational way. And I think it showed a great deal about the city of New York, which has not always been my favorite place. And it also showed a great deal about the American people. And I think you're going to find that we are going to be really prepared to back the President all the way now. In this sense, I do think it's like Pearl Harbor, because it's Pearl Harbor that led us all to come together to defend ourselves against the Japanese. I think this is Pearl Harbor in a sense, in bringing us now to look at this terrorist issue as in fact we should look at it, which is, if we don't deal with it now, it will be so much worse as the years go on.
Secretary Eagleburger, thank you. It's good to talk to you again. If I could just second one thing he said. Of all of the images that we've seen in the 12 hours that we've been here, it is a scene of New Yorkers calmly evacuating the area, very slowly walking, no panic, no screaming, helping one another, that has stayed with us. It is not the most dramatic picture, but it is one of the most telling pictures we have seen about how people respond in moments of extraordinary crisis. Paula?
I'll also tell you, Arian, the story that hasn't been told is the generosity of the spirit of the New York people. I mean, a lot of New Yorkers get a bad rap here, but the fact is there was a plea made for people to donate blood, and at many area hospitals there were as many as 4 to 5 hour waits.
Yeah.
People lining up.
This is a city that has taken a number of terrible hits in recent time, but in moments like this, it is truly the best of us that we saw today. And I don't think it's simply New Yorkers. I think we would have seen this most anywhere else. But they're a tough group out there below us, 30 or 20 floors, and they handled an awful, awful experience today with extraordinary calm, to which I think we all are grateful.
All right, right now I'm going to check in with James Kallstrom, who was formerly of the FBI. Welcome, thank you for joining us tonight. Sir, can you explain to the American public how it is possible that 4 commercial airliners were hijacked in a several-hour period?
I don't think we can explain that right now, Paula. I mean, we'll be answering those questions in the future. I can tell you this, that everyone in law enforcement and the intelligence agencies prayed and hoped that something like this would never happen. It has happened. I thought the President gave a great speech tonight. I was particularly impressed. It's a bit redundant from the other speakers, but his discussion of there will be no difference between those that committed this horrendous act and those that supported, harbored, assisted this horrific act. I think that's a very, very key point. And as the days roll out, the United States, this great country we all live in, and the heroism that you saw on the streets of New York, I saw that day in and day out in smaller tragedies, and I'm sure we see that throughout the United States. But as the days wear on, the United States and the Allies, if they carry out what the President said, we'll be far better off for it.
If you would, sir, though, would you come back to the vulnerability that was exposed today? What is the significance that 2 planes were successfully hijacked from Boston? What is the significance of the fact that all 4 of these flights were cross-country flights?
Well, I mean, I think we can read into that, Paula. I don't know the answers. It would seem like the interesting and tragic thing is that people would give their lives that could also fly sophisticated airplanes, that they apparently could get on these airplanes through generally good screening techniques. I heard one report that they were carrying knives or box cutters, and that could be.
How do you get through security with box cutters on you?
Well, I'm not going to go into all the different ways that could happen, and I don't know exactly what happened. I don't think now is the time to try to figure that out. Obviously, people want to know that answer, but I think now let's concentrate on the dead, the families, those that are still alive in the rubble in New York, in the Pentagon, out in Pennsylvania. Let's work like crazy to find out who did this. That's what's going on right now. And let's bring those folks to justice. And let's do what the President said. Let's see no difference between those that did it and those that helped it, harbored it, assisted it. Let's do that.
If you would walk us through the process that begins tomorrow. Rescue workers still are not able to penetrate that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center because of falling debris, because of smoke. Walk us through what we can expect tomorrow.
More of the same. I mean, I think everybody is 24 hours a day now. I mean, I saw reports just a while back that close to 200 New York City firemen are missing. 40 or 50 New York City police officers are missing. And certainly all the people that are in the World Trade Center are missing. So there's been a valiant attempt already to save lives, and that'll continue.
All right, Mr. Kallstrom, thank you so much for your time this evening. Right now, Aaron and I are going to hand this back to Wolf, who continues to stand by in Washington.
Thank you very much, Paula. And I want to report what a senior administration official is telling CNN, that the President's National Security Council will be convening once again shortly to review what has happened and presumably to discuss some various options about what is happening. President Bush, of course, will be participating together with his National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State Colin Powell, the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, and the Vice President, Dick Cheney. When we get some information on that, of course, we'll report that as well. But I want to bring in CNN's Greta Van Susteren. You were at National Airport early this morning when that American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon. What did you see, Greta?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I was on a flight on a runway to go to New York. It was canceled because they said 2 planes had run into the building in New York, so they canceled our flight. I got off the plane. I headed back to my car to come back to work. I was on the rooftop of National Airport's parking lot, which is about 2 blocks from the Pentagon, and I heard something funny. Well, no, first my husband said to me, "We better get out of here," and I thought it was a little bit strange. My husband's acting a little bit like an alarmist. I turned back to look at him. I heard something funny. I looked over his shoulder. I saw something. I'm not sure quite what it was, but low level. Then all of a sudden there was silence. Then there was a kaboom, and then smoke came billowing out, and I knew that it was the Pentagon. The Pentagon's about 2 blocks, of course, from National Airport, hidden behind some buildings. And there was just smoke and debris flying all over, coming up in the air. Obviously a very terrible sight.
And we're taking a look at some live pictures right now. You can see the fires still continuing at the Pentagon now, some 12 hours later. What was your first thought, though, when you heard that kaboom? Did you have any sense what was really going on?
At that point, I knew there was a big problem. I knew it was the Pentagon, and I knew that something horrible had happened, and I could see the magnitude of it. And it was really one of terror, because we had no idea, was there more coming? Was National Airport...
We were before. We're very hopeful that we're going to continue to clean up the area and get things as back to normal as possible by Monday. The subway tests that we did today all seem to work, so there's no reason why they won't work tomorrow and the next day, and we can get more things open. The stock exchange will be open. The mercantile exchange will be open. We're going to have a additional ferry service on 58th Street and First Avenue in Brooklyn to the Whitehall ferry terminal. So there'll be a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan. There hasn't been a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan in a long, long time. At some point after the Brooklyn Bridge was built, I think they did away with the ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan. But now there'll be a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and it'll bring a lot of people to Wall Street. It'll start at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, go to 9 a.m., and then operate between 3:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. at night. So it'll be another means of transportation. The medical examiner is here, and we're going to ask Dr. Hirsch to explain the DNA announcement that we're making in order to alert people to what they have to bring. They have to bring with them, and to explain some of the process that we'll be going through in the next couple weeks, if not months. The economic development efforts seem to be working really well. It's a joint state and city effort. We're contacting lots of businesses, and so far the responses have been very positive with regard to people wanting to stay, wanting to find new sites, wanting to continue to invest in the city. And with the number of people in the city of New York, it appears as if the city may be even more popular now than it used to be in the past as a place to come. So the support and the willingness of people to invest in the city and people to come to the city of New York may have actually increased as a result of this. Maybe that's a way of showing support for the city of New York now that it's been attacked in the way that it has, but we're very grateful for that. And we're also very grateful for the President's visit. I think that's done an awful lot to demonstrate that kind of support. We've taken out 22,008 tons of debris so far, 2,047 truckloads, and there have been 84, as of at least this count about 3 o'clock this afternoon, 84 bodies that have been recovered.
Those are identified. 60 others.
I'm sorry, 84 bodies that have been identified, 60 more that have been recovered, and the total dead on arrival right now is 159, according to the police department's count. And of those, 24 are firefighters, 2 civilian EMTs, 2 Port Authority police officers, 1 New Jersey firefighter. And our hearts go out to all of them, because in each one of those cases we're going to have situations like we had today. And tomorrow the fire commissioner is going to announce promotions, so we'll have him describe that in a few minutes. Governor?
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you. This is a sad day, and there will be other sad days as well. And the prayers of all New Yorkers, and I believe all Americans, are with the families who went through the difficult process of saying final goodbyes to the true heroes who have done so much to lead and inspire the fire department over the course of the past decades. I wanted to comment as well on President Bush's visit to New York yesterday. It was exactly what I believe New York needed. That visit was uplifting and raised the morale of the hundreds and thousands of heroes who are down there working on the site right now. It raised the spirits, I believe, of all New Yorkers. And as we go through the suffering, one of the things the President did, along with the mayor, yesterday was to spend not a half hour as he was scheduled to, but closer to 3 hours with the families of some of those whose loved ones have passed on or are missing. And he shared tears with them and hugs with them and prayers with them. And I think that was enormously helpful to those families as they go through this tremendous grief. And the mayor and I were honored to have been with the President while he showed this type of human side to his leadership during this very real crisis. The state deployment, we're continuing to do everything we can to back up the tremendous effort that the city is making. We now have 4,500 National Guard troops activated here in the city. We're rotating on an ongoing basis 500 state police, and we have 22 different state agencies working here to help with the relief effort and recovery process. Which brings me to the question of volunteers. And I was at the Javits Center earlier today, and we are just enormously grateful and proud to the literally tens of thousands of people from across America who have come here to help out. I met people from South Texas. I met a person from Montenegro who had come here in an effort to help out. It's just incredible, the outpouring of support. And, but what we're telling people is that control of the site is essential, that having people volunteer and go down to the site right now is not necessary. While we're very grateful for their willingness to help and their commitment to be a part of the relief effort, there are other better ways people can do it. And they should look to help. And some of the ways to do it are back home where they're from, to join their ambulance corps. We've been deploying those throughout the time. Join their fire department. Help the Salvation Army and Red Cross go through their relief efforts. Donate blood. These are all things that people out there who want to help can do right in their home communities that could be of enormous help as we go forward. And I wouldn't mind suggesting as well that people who are that committed and interested could sign up and join the National Guard. Because it's not just in times of war and military action that the National Guard is so helpful. It's ice storms and blizzards and fires and, of course, tragic attacks like this. So there's so much people can do without having to come to the site, and that's what we would encourage them to do as we go forward. I also want to, again, people have been donating, and our World Trade Center Relief Fund, along with the city's Twin Towers Fund and the United Way's September 11th Fund, have been just incredibly gratified by the outpouring of support, and the donations can be made to the World Trade Center Relief Fund through a website, www.state.my.us, and that will coordinate, we will coordinate with the Twin Towers Fund and the other relief funds as well. And finally, the Business Assistance Program was enormously successful. Yesterday, we had close to 300 entities, from individual proprietorships to large corporations coming in looking for help, and we will continue to offer that joint assistance, city, state, federal, to businesses looking for that type of assistance. And the number, in addition to the city's operation down on Pine Street with our joint operation on 3rd Avenue, is that businesses looking for this help can call as 1-800-I-LOVE-NY. And we would encourage people to feel comfortable calling that number, and we'll do everything we can to help. So again, Mayor, thank you for your leadership. We thank the President for the incredible support that he and the federal government have shown, and we're going to get through this. Thank you.
Tomorrow we're going to promote about 160 firefighters, lieutenants, captains, battalion chiefs, deputy chiefs, and assistant chiefs to assist us in this rescue effort and in the training that's necessary for so many new people that will be in our squad units, our rescue units. And in addition to those people that we need to run those units, we need to continue training in hazardous materials and everything else, just to be prepared for anything that might happen in this city. So the fire department has been severely wounded. We've lost at least missing many of our top leaders, our top commanders, and we have to prepare. Even hopefully, if we find some, certainly going to be very, very seriously injured, and we have to go on, and we'll begin that tomorrow morning. Excuse me?
Where will that take place?
We'll do it outside of Fire Department headquarters tomorrow morning at noon.
Can we replace Chief Yancey and...
Yes, Chief Nigro is going to assume Chief of Department, and Chief Cassano is going to be Chief of Operations.
The second person was?
Chief Salvatore Cassano, C-A-S-S-A-N-O.
And is Dan Nigro?
Nigro, N-I-G-R-O. I'm sorry. Daniel.
Richard.
As the mayor said, getting the Emergency Operations Center back in almost less than 48 hours was a terrific effort by a lot of people. I want to thank Henry Jackson from my staff who served as my project manager. I want to thank Verizon who really did a yeoman's job getting us telephone service, and all the agencies that are in here that helped get us back up so we can work effectively, keep information flowing, and keep everyone informed.
I have to do one thing, though, in exchange for Richie working for 48 hours, getting this done. Paul Shearer is 13 years old today, so his dad owes him a birthday present, which may be interesting since his Little League nickname is Hollywood, and he thinks he's 30, not 13. So I'm going to wish Paul a happy birthday. And if you wish him a happy birthday too, Doug.
All right, to our viewers who've been watching this, you have been watching a bit of an update coming to us from the city leaders and state leaders of New York.
Or not. I mean, if you remember the bombings of the embassy in Kenya and Tanzania, the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. So I wouldn't make too direct a connection to the Middle East peace process.
The president said we will take action and see no difference between those who committed the crime and those who harbored them. That's a direct threat against anybody around this. Do you expect to see retaliatory action soon?
Well, I don't know how soon you will see it. I would expect to see it. We have contingency plans. We had them way back when I was dealing with these issues for the United States. And I remember well, as a matter of fact, Larry, when I was meeting with the foreign minister of Iraq in the lead up to the Gulf War in 1991, and I warned him against using weapons of mass destruction against American forces. I said the American people will demand retribution, and we have the means to exact it. And I think they took that to heart. They didn't use weapons of mass destruction, but I think the American people, following the tragic events of today, are going to demand retribution, and I think the United States does have the means to exact it, and I think we will.
Mr. Secretary, when you fear terrorism, as all of us have to fear it to be logical human beings, it's around us, did you ever think of anything like this?
Not anything of this scale. I mean, you have to really be amazed, or at least I'm amazed, at the degree of success. 4 airplanes were hijacked. 75%, 3 out of the 4, found their targets. We haven't had a hijacking in this country in over 10 years. And yet these people were successful in hijacking the aircraft, not only hijacking them, taking control of them, flying them into their intended targets. It really is rather surprising and rather amazing. And I'm reminded also, Larry, of the successes that American counterterrorism and counterintelligence forces have had through the years. I remember during the time that I served, any number of instances where we would have a threat and we would catch it in time and we would roll it up. We would prevent it from happening. That happened over and over and over again. It didn't happen today, quite tragically. We didn't catch this one.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Larry. Good to see you.
Secretary James Baker, the former Secretary of State. Now we go back to New York. Standing by are Teresa Ward. She worked in the World Trade Center, in the number 2 World Trade Center on the 33rd floor. Bill Heitman, who worked on the 81st floor, was also working at the time of the 93 bombing. John Avarone, who works at the World Trade Financial Center, that's right next door. And Tim Cavanaugh, who works about a quarter mile away from the World Trade Center. He was on the phone to a friend who works in the World Trade Center, was suddenly cut off. And Rose Arce, our CNN producer in New York, who's been on the scene. She's outside. There's Rose. all day long, it seems, on top of this. Let's start with Teresa. Where were you, Teresa? What happened?
I was in my office, just starting my day, booting up my computer, having my coffee, and we felt the building shudder. And at first we didn't really know what was happening, but we all sort of walked out of our offices and looked around. And as we looked out the window towards the West Side Highway, we saw nothing but paper and debris floating from the sky. It was, overwhelming.
Did you panic?
Actually, we didn't. There were a lot of people in my office that were in the '93 bombing, so everyone just sort of decided to leave, and everybody left in an orderly fashion via the stairs. And it was very orderly. In fact, everybody was really calm, so we were fortunate in that regard.
Now, is it true, Teresa, when you were outside, they told you it was okay to go back in?
No, actually, what happened was we were in the stairwell. I was on the 9th floor, and there was an announcement on the PA system that basically said that there was an incident in One World Trade, but that Two World Trade was okay, and that you could return to your offices. It was okay. And at that point, a few coworkers and I jumped on the elevator, and we thought for a moment about going back up, then thought better of it, and decided to go down. And at that point, we had no clue what was happening with One World Trade or Two World Trade. And when we got out to the street, it was just pandemonium.
Teresa, do you know why you didn't go back up despite the fact the announcement said you could?
Well, it just seemed like there was so much going on, and we felt that it would be better, as everyone was exiting the building already, to just gather with everybody from my firm on the concourse level. So it just seemed like the sensible thing to do at the time, and in retrospect, probably saved
Very
a lot of lives.
Good instinct. Bill Heitman worked in World Trade Center 1, the first building hit. He was working on the 81st floor. What was happening? And you were also in the 93, right, Bill?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. What happened at the moment of impact? Where were you? What happened?
At the moment of impact, I was knocked out of my chair, and we just briefly panicked and headed towards the middle of the floor to get away from the windows. And then we headed for the stairwell and started heading down from the 81st floor in an orderly fashion. And aside from some people that were suffering from asthma, and some injured, it was actually well-spirited going down, until we started getting down to the 30s and the 40s.
Then what?
And the firemen started passing us, and we're collapsing on the stairs.
The firemen were collapsing?
Yes, just from the loads they were carrying, the oxygen tanks, the hoses. It was really bad. It was tough to see these guys.
Did you say to yourself, "Here we go again"?
Yes, I did. But at this particular point, it didn't seem like it was a bombing. And after the initial crash going down, it seemed like the worst of it was over.
And you did or did not know it was a plane?
We had heard when we were in the stairwell. Probably it took a total of an hour for me and the people that I was to get downstairs. We had heard when we were about halfway down that a plane some kind of plane had hit, but at that point we thought it was small, a helicopter, a small craft airplane.
As soon as you got out, what did you do?
I beg your pardon?
When you got out of the building, what did you do? Did you hang around or take off?
As soon as we got down to the lobby level, I myself was actually surprised at the damage that there was to the concourse level of the Trade Center. I thought at that point the condition would look not as damaged, but as soon as we got downstairs, we were walking in ankle-deep water, and there seemed to be this an urgency to just get us out of the building, where I thought that people were just going to be directed to like triage units or something. But once I stepped outside onto the street, there was something really wrong, and that's when I think the fear of of the buildings collapsing really became apparent. And I had only been out of the building less than a minute when tower number 2 came down.
Oh boy. John Ivarone, you work at the World Trade Financial Center. That's next door. What did you see? Where were you?
I was coming back from a coffee break, walked onto our trading desk and saw, everyone watching the TV monitors, which was, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I thought the market was going to go crazy or something. And then someone told me that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. It sounded like a boom. It sounded like actually a big bomb, and that, everyone was just calm at first, but a couple of my traders ran by me, went immediately down the stairwell and started evacuating. I just followed them, went down to the right by the seaport, I guess, seaport area, right by the World Financial Center, and you could just see it. It was just smoke was billowing out.
The booms you felt, John, were from the second plane, right? Because they were already looking at the accident of the first plane?
Right, exactly. The boom was certainly from the second plane. But it was amazing. It was just standing across the street, because my building is right across the street from the World Trade Center. And and just watching, there's people up on the 80th floor just waving.
What did you see? Did any people jump?
I saw 15 to 20 people jump. It was, without a doubt, it was the most, at first I saw a little debris coming out, and then you saw, it was definitely bodies the way they were, it was something you could never ever imagine, like even in movies, it was the saddest thing I ever saw in my life.
Was there any fear for your building and your safety?
Absolutely. Being right across the street, of course, I guess when something like that happens, you don't start thinking about your building, but thank God, the one guy I was following just started running away, and I followed him, and we got to a place in Battery Park where you can actually, we just saw people just waving for like helicopters, anything, and then just, and I guess in fear of getting burned or something, they just leapt.
So you were an eyewitness to death. You were an eyewitness to people jumping.
Absolutely. It was, and I didn't realize it until, getting home and watching on television what I'd really witnessed, and then that's when I had.
Boy. Before we talk with Tim and Rose, we understand we have on the phone with us a member of the New York City Power Rescue Team. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What is the name of your group? What organization is it?
Well, actually, we're fugitive recovery agents, and we're down here offering our assistance with federal authorities. We're waiting for the coordination, and then we'll be going in with any other rescue teams.
Can you tell us where you are right now?
We were right down at the building assessing the damage for my team, and it was a little bit smoggy, obviously. We're covered in soot right now, and we're taking our break until we can coordinate what's going on.
What early assessment do you have?
Right now, it's a mess. It's like Beirut down there. It's really a mess.
Can you describe it a little more? What do you see?
A lot of debris all over the place, obviously. Chairs, we even saw airplane chairs, over the place. That was
really
unusual, yes. Glass buildings 7-8 blocks away, smashed. It's devastation, completely.
And have you seen any bodies?
Not yet, we haven't. We're waiting for everybody else, wait for coordination to get together, all the federal authorities, also state authorities, and then we'll join a team then.
And what's your role?
I am actually, we are tunnelers, really. We will go through the debris, small cracks, anything what we can do.
Why do you do this?
It's what we do.
You've worked lots of things, nothing comparable to this, naturally.
No, nothing. I've never experienced something like this before.
How long do you think this is going to take to go through?
A long time. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done.
Thank you very much for speaking with us. We'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Back to the New York Bureau and Tim Kavanaugh, who works about a quarter-mile away from the World Trade Center. As we understand it, Tim, you were on the phone?
Actually, my friend's brother was on the line with him, and they got cut off immediately. And And then I was on a conversation with his brother, and he told me that his brother had heard the first crash, and he was informing his brother of what had happened. And then all of a sudden the phone got cut off from him, and that was the last he's heard of his brother since. I brought his picture so that maybe if there's someone out there who can see him, who has seen him, or if he's in a hospital somewhere, maybe someone can call and let him.
Can we see it?
Sure.
Where's the picture?
It's right here on my hand.
Want to hold it up? Okay, so we get a close-up of this. And he worked in the building?
He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 102nd floor. It's a guy I coach football with. I've known him my whole life. He's a great man.
You are probably resorting to prayer.
Actually, I walked from my office, which is a quarter-mile away, and it was desolate. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off, and there were ashes like in the street, like about a foot to 6 inches of ashes, if you could imagine that, walking down the street. And I walked over to Our Lady of Victory Church, which is right down the street from Wall Street. And Wall Street, usually they have the barricades there, and there was nothing. It was gone. And you know, I picked up a piece of paper, and I saw the paper and read it, and it was from the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, and I just knew that it was, you know, you couldn't imagine it. It was like being in downtown Beirut in America.
Good grief. And on the scene is Rose Arce. Rose is a CNN producer in New York, a veteran CNN producer, and a very capable CNN producer. Where were you when this happened this morning, Rose? I can't hear Rose. Okay. I'm sorry, Rose. Okay. We'll have to check back with you, Rose. We're having difficulty. Let's go to Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Jamie, first, we've heard the briefings earlier. What kind of shape is that building in?
Pretty bad shape, Larry. It's nearly 12 hours after this plane slammed into the side of the Pentagon. The building is still burning. The firefighters say they have the blaze contained in an area, but it's still not under control. In fact, if you look right behind my head, you can see some flames licking out of the roof there. That's part of the firefighting technique of trying to cut the roof open and let the fire burn through in order to put this out. Nevertheless, the Pentagon is vowing, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and President Bush both saying that the building will open for business as usual tomorrow. That may be possible if they just open the other side of the building, where of course the Secretary's office is, the Pentagon briefing room, the National Military Command Center, all on the other side of the building. You know, in some ways, there was a little bit of luck in today's incident in that this part of the building was under renovation. That meant that some of the new space that had just been renovated was not yet occupied, and it also had improved fire retardant capabilities. And on the old side, over basically in this direction, that part of the building, people had just moved out to get ready for the next phase of renovation. So there weren't nearly as many people as might have been in the building at that time of day. Nevertheless, Pentagon officials expect the death toll to be high, but they are not saying publicly what they think that death toll will be. Larry?
And Jamie, have you been able at all to see the aircraft?
Well, you know, earlier today I got right up next to the building and I took a look at some of the pieces that were outside. There were only very small pieces of that American Airlines jetliner, a cockpit that was a window that was all smashed, part of the fuselage that was bent and twisted, but most of the parts of the plane are still inside the building, according to people who've been in and seen it.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. We have a panel of senators joining us, and before we check with them, here is just a moment of what the statement made tonight by President George Bush at the White House. Watch.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
We'll be hearing in a while from a terrorist expert, an aviation expert. We'll also be hearing from the former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, and we'll be checking with others. But right now, a panel of 4 distinguished senators have joined us in Washington. They are Senator John Warner, Republican of Virginia, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee; Senator John Kerry, Democrat of Massachusetts, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, including the Subcommittee on International Operations and Terrorism; Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, member of the Select Intelligence Committee. She's chairing the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Technology, Terrorism, and Government Information; and Senator Fred Thompson, Republican of Tennessee, a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, a ranking member of Governmental Affairs. We'll start with Senator Warner. Was this a failure of information techniques tonight and today, Senator?
Well, Larry, I spent much of the afternoon with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and indeed had an opportunity to talk with the President from the Pentagon. That we assess tomorrow. Tonight, we grieve for those who've lost their lives, the wounded, their families, and we look upon this as the greatest tragedy in the history of our country, but also one of its finest hours, when we've seen this country come together like never before, whether it's the firemen or the rescue operators or the military all over the world, and we stand with one voice being spoken by our President, and he did very well tonight.
Senator Kerry, did your Committee on International Operations and Terrorism ever actually fear something like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. But let me join John, and I know all my colleagues, in just expressing, I mean, I think all of us here in Washington are feeling in very personal ways the loss of what's happened here. I know that I had one friend I know of already on that plane from Boston, and I dread the learning of perhaps others, but for thousands of families tonight, there is just a huge loss. And I think in every American, there's a sense of, there's a fury, an intense burning fury about this, and a determination to do what is right about it. We have always known this could happen. We've warned about it, we've talked about it. I regret to say, as I served on the Intelligence Committee up until last year. I can remember after the bombings of the embassies, after TWA 800, we went through this flurry of activity talking about it, but not really doing the hard work of responding. We need to do that now, and I'm confident that the size of this, the nature of this loss, and the nature of this attack are going to motivate everybody to come together to do that. And I think that's imperative. And we also, I think, Larry, I was heartened by the President's comments tonight, need to make certain that those countries that sponsor terrorism, that support it, that harbor these fugitives, are as much a part of the problem as those who engage in the terrorist act themselves. And we need to make certain as a country we respond to that boldly and bravely, and not recklessly, but boldly.
Senator Feinstein, what are the next few days going to be like? There's going to be opinions from, what's your read on what's next?
Oh, I think there are many of us that feel that this was an act of war against the United States, that its loss is our human loss is going to be extreme, that the deviltry, the cunning, and the evil behind the act is extraordinary, and that we need to respond, and that America needs to come together with a unity and a purpose and respond. We cannot be a paper tiger. This act, in my view, it wasn't coincidence now that the World Trade Center has been the victim twice. And I think it's a symbol of America, and it's a symbol of what we want to protect as well. And so I think tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the leadership has announced that there will be a resolution on the floor of the Senate for many of us. And I'm one that believes very strongly that rather than arguing over missile defense, the asymmetric threat against the United States is the most serious one. And we've had a good indication of that today.
Senator Thompson, President John F. Kennedy once said, when asked about his own safety, if someone is willing to give up their own life, that is almost impossible to protect against. What do you do when you have people like today obviously in numbers more than 10 of the total 4 planes, who died for this. How do you counter that?
Very difficult. I think there'll always be a window of vulnerability that we'll have. We're living in a different world now. I think we let our defenses down a bit after the Cold War and wanted to enjoy the peace dividend. But the fact of the matter is the world's a more dangerous place in many respects than it has been in times past. We're now seeing the other side of the technology coin. Technology has been a wonderful thing for us, but it also allows bad people to do bad things that they couldn't do a short time ago. We saw one form of that today, probably in the communications area. There are several other threats out there, though. The missile threat is one of them. It is real. The cyber terrorism that could shut down our computers and our communication networks and our transportation system and all that is very real. We simply have to get about implementing the policies, appropriating the funds necessary to address these across the board.
Senator Warner, what do you say to Americans in their grief about what they should do? You try not to let terrorism affect you, but people are not going to go easily to airports tomorrow. What do you say to them?
Have faith in this great country. We've survived, although this is the worst, we've survived other crises. I see tonight in Washington among my colleagues, we're no longer Democrat, Republican. We're united as a Congress behind our president, and we're going to take every step. Number one, to find out what happened and see that it cannot be repeated. And secondly, we're a nation under the rule of law, but we will relentlessly pursue and hold accountable those who perpetrated this crime against our citizens.
And when we pursue that, Senator Kerry, does America as a nation pursue it legally? Does it go through world courts, or does it take off?
There are 3 ways to pursue it, Larry. One is multilaterally, which takes more time. That's the way George Bush, the father, did it in the Gulf War. You can do it bilaterally, you and another nation. You can reach an agreement, you can work together. And you can do it unilaterally when the circumstances call for it. I personally believe this is a circumstance because of the nature of it. As Diane said, as many have said today, this is an act of war. The difficulty is, unlike Pearl Harbor, this is a stealth enemy. Japan was identifiable. We knew where to find them ultimately, and after chasing around, and we could identify. Here, we know pretty much. I mean, there's a great certainty among many people about where the fingers point. But ultimately, we don't want to be a terrorist ourselves. We have to do what we do with the knowledge and the certainty that we can determine, but we must be prepared, absolutely, to move unilaterally if we need to protect the honor and the civility that we stand for. And I think that everybody in this country would support that based on the proper response with the proper information.
Senator Feinstein, what if? What if it's bin Laden? Well, if it is bin Laden, what do? You go into Afghanistan, you look for him, you bomb, what do you do?
I don't think America can be a paper tiger in this instance. This was a major attack, and let's face it, there isn't going to be chaos. We're not going to bend down. We are going to rise up as one people. And it's got to be stopped, and you have to ferret it out. I agree with what Dick Holbrooke said on this network earlier. You've got to work with our allies, the NATO allies, particularly Russia, China, and the moderate Arab countries. That's Egypt, that's Jordan, that's the Saudis. And we have to make a statement that is so strong that any country that harbors, that trains, that gives money to, that supports, becomes an enemy of the civilized world. Because if this can happen here, it can happen in other places. Terrorism, as our report will say very shortly, isn't a crisis, it's an ongoing condition. And we've got to change the condition. So I must say, I feel very strongly about this, that the United States must respond. Those of us that have had the classified briefings over a period of time understand some of the networks that are functioning out there, even in this country, as a matter of fact. And it's not too difficult to put together 2 and 2, and I think get 4.
All right.
Larry,
Senator Thompson?
Can I just say that Putin Putin was one of the first heads of state to call our president. And the Secretary of Defense this afternoon, colleagues, I was there when he talked with the Russian defense minister. That's an example of the type of support we're getting. The world has got to come and help us solve this problem, because terrorism is a common enemy to all of us.
And Senator Thompson, if the state that harbors them is as responsible as those who commit it, therefore are those civilians in peril?
Yes, they are. The powers that be in those nations have put them in peril. Saddam uses his civilians, as we know. There's no way around that, but we've got to face up to it. I agree with Diane that the greatest deterrent that we can have is the knowledge in the minds of potential terrorists around the world that there will be swift, accurate retribution. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that.
And Larry, could I just
Thank you. We're out of time, but we'll do a lot more with you in the nights ahead with all four of you and others. Secretary William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, will be joining us. As we go to meet him, there was an extraordinary scene on the Capitol steps tonight. Look at what happened. Watch.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow.
September 11th, 2001. That date will inject our brains. Joining us from Washington is former Senator, former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. Were you shocked, or was there an expectancy of something like this?
Well, I, like every American, every person watching this the world over, was shocked to see the act of terror actually being perpetrated on the screen and the horror that we all witnessed. Was I surprised? The answer is no. We have known for some time that Osama bin Laden and other organizations have targeted the United States abroad and at home. We formed the so-called Hart-Rudman Commission several years ago, and they filed 3 reports, the last of which was quite prophetic, indicating that we should anticipate acts of terrorism on American soil by terrorists who may in fact use weapons of mass destruction and engage in nearly simultaneous types of multiple attacks. And so it doesn't come as a surprise. It comes as a surprise or shock to see the horror that we have witnessed today. But we have got to take more measures. I agree with much of what has been stated this evening, but we also have to take care that we don't engage in the wholesale slaughter of innocents abroad. We have to go after those groups and those who support those groups in terms of our responses.
So we don't go in and bombs away. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have the right information. And we don't want to prejudge the matter, although those footprints of guilt would seem to lead in one very certain direction. I think we go to those who are harboring the suspected groups and serve them notice. I think President Bush did that very forcefully tonight. And that they must produce those individuals, and certainly they will face a number of consequences, and I don't think we have to spell them out. They will be certainly diplomatic, economic, and perhaps even military action, but we should await for the President and his national security team to deliver that particular message.
You worked there for a long time. Were you a little surprised that the Pentagon wasn't better protected?
Well, the Pentagon, as you note from its proximity to the airport, really cannot be better protected in terms of aircraft flying near the airport and passing over the Pentagon itself. It's been one of my worst nightmares over the years to be out on the parade ground or in my office and know that at any time a plane could, through either accidentally or be directed into the Pentagon itself. There is virtually no way that one can protect the Pentagon against that type of an attack unless you banned all flights going into National itself, but even that might not be sufficient. So it's almost impossible to protect against an airplane engaging that type of activity.
What do we do about a bin Laden? We've heard the name, we've seen him occasionally. He's obviously been involved in acts of terrorism over the year, but what do you do about someone like this?
I think the first thing that we should resist doing, and that is focusing solely on him. To the extent that he is responsible, he will be held accountable and he will receive just punishment. But there may be other bin Ladens out there, and there'll be more following. What we have to do is to eliminate the climate under which they're allowed to train, to be funded, and to perpetrate these acts. Senator Warner talked about President Putin calling President Bush today. I was in Moscow a year ago when one of the bombs went off, destroying one of their buildings. I went on national television pledging the United States to work hand in hand with the Russian people because they were being terrorized. And so this is an international problem. We have to gather our allies and say, this transcends all borders. When America is wounded, the rest of the world bleeds as well. And what happens here can have a dramatic impact on the life and the lifestyles of so many the world over. So we are in this together, and every American is in this together. Much like we came together after Pearl Harbor, we're coming together now, and we will respond as one nation.
And Mr. Secretary, it must be asked, how did they get on these airplanes?
Well, that's to be determined. Obviously, they were able to slip through the security. They may have had inside assistance. You may have had a situation in which bin Laden or another group has been placing sleepers for a year or so or less. We don't know exactly, having assistance to allow them to get on. There are many ways in which that could have happened, but that's going to have to await the investigation itself by the FBI and others.
Thank you very much, good friend. Always good seeing him. Not under these circumstances, though. William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense. In a moment, we're going to talk with Tim O'Brien, the CNN correspondent, close friend of the Olsen family, as was this program. Barbara Olsen passed away today on American Air Flight 77. Brian Jenkins with us in Los Angeles, the terrorism expert. And Arthur Woke, the famed attorney who has done a lot of work involving aviation and who is, we understand, an angry man tonight. Before we check in with Tim and Brian and Arthur, tonight on the Capitol steps, the members of House and Senate gathered. Watch this.
Take beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Ted Olson is the Solicitor General of the United States. You know him very well from the many, many appearances he made before the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court in the question over the election of Bush over Gore. His wife was Barbara Olson, who appeared on this program so many times in the last 4 weeks, almost every night. Barbara Olson was on American Air Flight 77 that left Dulles, bound for Los Angeles, and crashed into the Pentagon. I spoke to Ted Olson today briefly, and it was just sad, so sad to speak to someone who had just lost his wife. Another gentleman who spoke to him was a much closer friend to the Olson family. He's Tim O'Brien, CNN correspondent. He called Ted on the phone. We understand, Tim, that you were at their wedding.
I was in their wedding. I was also out at his house this afternoon along with a number of other friends. It was a very sad afternoon.
Now, I know he told us she called him, but he went into detail with you. What happened during that call? This is the only information we have on these terrorists.
She was able to call him twice. How she could pull that off, we don't know, but she did. The phone went dead the first time after a very brief conversation, maybe less than a minute, and she called him back. And she said to him, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Vintage Barbara, ready to take charge. She was in the back of the plane, huddled with other passengers, and we're told flight personnel and presumably the pilot. She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters. If they were armed with other weapons, such as machine guns or any kind of gun, you'd think she might have said that first, but she said no, knives and box cutters. I asked Ted, did she tell you how many people were there, how many hijackers were there? And Ted said no, but she referred to them in the plural, so there was more than one. What about nationality? Did you get any sense of that? No. Motives? No.
They were all in the back of the plane, right, Tim? The pilots and the passengers were herded to the back of the 757.
That's the understanding I get from Ted, correct.
So whoever took over that plane was up front, and one of them had to know how to fly it.
Presumably that's the case, yeah, but you know that's speculation and we don't know for sure. It's conceivable there was a co-pilot who still may have been in the cockpit. We don't know, but there were flight personnel and most of the passengers huddled in the back. Incidentally, Barbara was not supposed to be on that flight today. Her original plan was to fly to California yesterday. Today is Ted Olson's birthday, and she wanted to be with him last night, and so that was the cost.
And when she was on the phone, Ted had already known about the crashes in New York, right?
That is correct, and he did tell her about that, so she had a good idea of what she was up against. She knew about the 2 crashes at the World Trade Center.
Tim, you stay with us. Brian Jenkins, you're an expert on terrorism. You've been involved in things like this for a long time, but nothing compared to this. Were you shocked?
Shocked, but not surprised.
Not surprised?
Not surprised, no. The possibility of a large-scale terrorist attack on this country is something that we have anticipated for a long time. There have been previous incidents involving multiple coordinated attacks. We have dealt with previous situations where it was either threatened or certainly a concern of the authorities that a hijacked aircraft would be crashed into into the middle of a city.
But from what Miss Olson described them as having, how did they get on the plane with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, that's difficult to say, and we don't know. I mean, people do board aircraft with all sorts of small things.
And get on?
And potentially get on. I suspect that's going to change now, but I mean, people board aircraft with small pen knives. They board aircraft with various kinds of metal objects. It does, however, raise some questions about how they were able to get on the aircraft and take control of the cockpit. This is not a standard hijacking where somebody seizes a passenger hostage and orders a pilot to fly to another city.
And in fact, in 3 of the 4 operations, they succeeded.
They did succeed.
The one that went down in Pennsylvania was obviously heading for Washington, is that correct? Something must have happened.
That's a safe presumption.
Arthur Woke, you're an expert at aviation accidents. You've been involved in the courts, often dealing with this, and we understand you're quite angry at this. Why?
Well, because to me, it's disgusting to hear the platitudes of the politicians inside the Beltway saying that the government is in charge. I thought the government was in charge this morning. Where was the government yesterday, 5 months ago, or a year ago when this was unfolding? Where were the national security agencies that are supposed to protect us from this? Where are our allies who are supposed to be part of this anti-terrorist network? Why are there no sky marshals on aircraft anymore? Was that a budgetary consideration of the FAA? Maybe that could have stopped it. So what bothers me, Larry, is that we're talking about burying what may be 25,000 people. There weren't supposed to be any more Pearl Harbors. We put in place a system to prevent this from happening. This was not a minimal terrorist act. This was something that required the cooperation of many, many people. And I don't understand